Hello, everyone. There you go. So, Vladimir Zworykin, very quick recap of what we have learned so far, and we have learned quite a lot. The recording as of the previous weekend is available. So, if there's something you want to know in more details, you know where to find this. Zworykin wasn't born in Moscow. He wasn't born anywhere in St. Petersburg, in a small town which is over 1,000 years old called Murom. That's what the city looked like. And the family of Zworykin was one of the richest in the city and probably one of the richest in the region. They dealt with the supply of grains and also transportation. His father, that's his father and Vladimir, he owned also a ferry, well, a small fleet of ferries, just as a passenger transport. It's not about actually logistics, but well, it's not about cargo. It's just passenger transport on the river. That's his mother. So it was a really big family and with a lot of connections. However, these connections were not used to, I would say, promote the boy. They were not used, well, they didn't have to pull the strings for the boy to finish the school and the special real school with flying colors. That's Zworykin in 1906. In 1906, he became a student of St. Petersburg Technical Institute. And before that, he had already been in charge of the school laboratory, and he had shown himself as a very bright student, especially in physics and mathematics. He also was, I would say, assistant to his father when it got to fixing the ferries, helping out with all sorts of things if they got broken on the ferry. So he was always there, and his father thought and hoped that the boy would take over the business from him when he retires, but that did not happen because because of the revolution. And we spoke in details uh, how young Vladimir, had to put on hold all his research in St. Petersburg. This is his alma mater, which he graduated from, and where his first experiments in television, in the transmitting of the image via electricity and the electromagnetic field, I know nothing about it. So I'm probably talking nonsense and making mistakes with regards to, I mean, technical things, but you get it. You already know it, so I'm not going into a lot of details since it's just a quick recap. And it all started thanks to Boris Rosing. We're going to be mentioning him a couple of times today. And so he was actually the pioneer, one of the first scientists in the world. He wasn't the only one, but one of the first, because as you know, in early 20th century, the scientific progress was, and I would say the technologies were developing at a frantic pace, and there was, many cases when several scientists and scholars all around the world would be researching and making discoveries in the similar fields or one of the same field, like even with the radio is just one example. It's either a Marconi or Popov. It's also the problem. It was also the question of who was the first one to get a patent for this, who was the first one to do this and that. But let's just say Boris Rosny was one of the first to experiment with with transmission of the images, and they succeeded in doing so. And the very first successful experiments, though I would say it was very raw and the image was blurry, and well, one couldn't even say what the image was, but they managed to do that, at least from one building to another. And after the graduation with flying colors from the institute, Zworykin went to Europe for internship. But the First World War put everything to an end, and he returned. He served well in the Russian Imperial Army. And then the revolution happened. So eventually he found himself in Omsk, and obviously being a child of I would say of a merchant um, from a conservative family, Zworykin found himself after the revolution in the White Army. So the revolution and the storm of the Winter Palace, as you know, gave rise to the civil war because Russian society was not unanimous with regards to which party to side with, and I would say that most of the working class people, so the majority of the people in the country, they supported the revolution, meaning the Bolsheviks, the Red Army, but there was also a minority, the Mensheviks, but Menshevik is not exactly the well. Let's not talk about Menshevik. Let's talk about the White Army. So they were the monarchists, and they were the minority, unfortunately. Or fortunately, well, but they were kind of doomed. But they fought really hard. So eventually, they managed uh, to gain ground in the east and Siberia. So Zworykin found himself in Omsk, which was the center of the White Army movement. And there they proclaimed Omsk the capital of the White state. Let's put it like this. And Zworykin even found a job there. He was put in charge of the telegraph unit, and he was given a task to purchase the equipment for communications from the West, from the US. So imagine this is the screenshot of the Google Maps. You see Grisha there. So this is approximately where we are now in Georgia, in Tbilisi. And this is, you can see the white point. It's where Zworykin was. This is the Siberia, basically, not far from my hometown, by the way. It's about 10 hours by train from Novosibirsk, my hometown, to Omsk. And it's there he had to go to Arkhangelsk to the port, and then from there, so on foot it's like 25 days journey. Imagine was still the civil war raging. Because of that, the European part of the country, which would have been a lot quicker, but he had to take several ferries, and also he had to take. Okay, hope my connectivity is okay. But in case it gets worse, I will just restart the rotor, which helped last time, which is yesterday. Yeah, so he had to go to Arkhangelsk, taking several ferries. And in Arkhangelsk, why also did he go there? Because this northernmost port that was available for the White Army movement, it was the hub where the European ambassadors and politicians fled to, those who did not support the Red Army, those who did not support the Bolshevik state. At that point, the Soviet Union had not actually been formed yet officially. Only after 1922, the name would apply after the Civil War would be over in 1921. But we can say the Red State, the Bolshevik state, this is okay. This is fine. It's making. I think it makes things a little easier. And from Arkhangelsk, he managed to get a visa to the States from the American ambassador. And through, just imagine, he first had to go to the, hold on. So Arkhangelsk, I just want to show you the map a little bit. I don't expect you to know very well what's going on in the up north Russia. So you see the island, in Novaya Zemlya. So Novaya Zemlya, it's the island in the Arctic Ocean, and then from there he would take the icebreaker, and the icebreaker was late for about several days. It was late, and then through the Barents Sea, eventually through the Norwegian Sea, and yes, he found himself in London. In London, he met with a great number of Russian immigrants, the exiles, right? With and He didn't find a lot of support there because he came with the bad news saying that unfortunately the Red Army was gaining ground and the white movement and the white state needed a lot of support. The immigrants did not want to believe that. And the hub where the Russian immigrants would mostly be hanging around would be the church, the Saint Sophia Cathedral in London. And I will be giving a talk about Russian immigrants in England because I haven't done that yet. But as you know, it's going to take some time for me since there's a lot of reading and putting together a lot of things. So that's just the interior of the church. It's the photo taken from Wikipedia. Beautiful church. But he knew he had to go further and he went to the States. In the States, he purchased the equipment and then he went back the same way, about 3 weeks journey from the US back to the country where the civil war is raging. Just imagine, most of us, I'm pretty sure, would have stayed. Like, why would you want to go back if you were able to get out? And everyone was really surprised to see him back. The person who was impressed the most was Alexander Kolchak, who was the head of the white state, and he sent him away again to the States to become Zworykin would have become a sort of an ambassador of the white Russian state, of the Kolchak state in the US. And he would have been given an immense support from the Russian immigrants in the States. That's for sure. So in fact, Zworykin, well, in a way, unknowingly could have pursued a political career, diplomatic career. So he went back from Omsk, again, another several weeks journey. But when he arrived to the States, he found out that the Kolchak state, Omsk, had failed and it was invaded and taken over by the Bolsheviks, by the Red Army. So that was it. There was nowhere to return to. So he stayed in the States. He found a job as an accountant, but he knew only one thing. He needed to go to Pittsburgh, to Westinghouse Research Laboratories that were carrying out extensive research in radio and I would say the related technologies. So he knew that would be the only place where his research could have been carried on with. After the 10-year break, eventually in Westinghouse was way lower than when the salary he was offered as an accountant in New York, but he was pursuing his dream. So such thing as money, trifle thing as money, well, that never mattered. So and exactly at that time in 1923. He started working on two most important things for television: the iconoscope and the kinescope. The two basically tubes with details here, but without these two tubes, television wouldn't have been possible. Like at all. And unfortunately, Westinghouse money to improve the technology, but David Sarnoff, the head of the Radio Corporation of America, who was a Jew born in the Russian Empire, and he was an immigrant just like Zworykin. And I will be talking about Sarnoff. Well, I'm sure okay. You may not have heard about him, but I'm sure you know NBC. So he is the founder of the NBC. You can look him up. An amazing story, absolutely amazing story. So David Sarnoff, and we watched an interview with Sarnoff and Zworykin. You can find it on YouTube. So he knew there was potential in that. And David Sarnoff and Radio Corporation of America liked the idea, and eventually, by 1930s, they had already invested some $40 million in the development of the technology because, yes, with this help of kinescope and iconoscope, the image that had been transmitted by electricity, electromagnetic field was way better. So they needed to work on the improvement and also on the somehow minimizing the size of these tubes because they were originally very big. They were like 60 centimeters big. So they needed to invest and spend millions of dollars to improve that. But by the end of the 1920s, the first television set had been launched for mass production. And this is Zworykin with his assistant promoting the television, which looks like a box. Well, you must have seen it in some museums. Well, this is a later version. It's about some 9-ish, 7-ish years older than the first model that was released, but nevertheless, it was still the same technology. So you didn't actually watch TV on the screen. You watched it through a mirror. As you can see, there is a mirror, and then by watching the mirror, you could actually see what was going on. But it was a huge television set. It was heavy. It was quite expensive, and obviously RCA would need to invest $2 more million into bringing televisions to every household, especially in the one-story America. Yeah, but all that became possible thanks to Zworykin and the grip and the eye of Sarnov. So here I'm providing kind of a very short breakdown of what kind of things had been done in the 1930s and the career ladder that Zworykin climbed over those years. And as you can see, Zworykin became an absolutely essential part of RCA, and he became the director of the Electronic Research Laboratory in New Jersey already in early 1930s. So that was an amazing career growth, and just an amazing life story. So no wonder he was given a home in Princeton, and his home, by the way, is still there. And somebody else is living there now. I don't know. It's not a museum. And his neighbors were Albert Einstein. And yes, Sarnoff and Einstein, were kind of good buddies and also neighbors. So Einstein and Zworykin also got along. And another neighbor, like from the left, it was Albert Einstein, and from the left, it was Robert Oppenheimer. Also another neighbor. Yeah. Okay. So I guess that speaks for itself. The kind of neighborhood he lived in. So and so as I said, NBC, NBC, RCA, they eventually they developed technology, so it was possible already to broadcast different programs, but it was only possible in a live stream mode. So it was just live broadcast, and obviously it's at that point it was not yet mass television, because still television was quite expensive and the coverage was selective. So it was not yet television in full swing. It would still require several more years, but it was already there. This is Zworykin. After the first success, he became a celebrity, and American press started calling him the father of television. He hated that title, but that's what reporters would pick up from each other, and these are the actual photographs and the videos from, well, because it was not recorded, because it was just live broadcasting. The videos are of a little later period, right? But you have the idea. You can find a lot of footage on YouTube. There are a lot of videos. So it's an open access. I'm omitting a lot of details as well, because also a lot of technical details. But so this is the photo of one of the very first news reports and articles that was published in the States. So it was Zworykin with it's either a kinescope or iconoscope. I'm not sure which one it is, but that was the game changer. That all would have to change many more times in order for it to work and bring television to every household. But that was it. That was the beginning. So whether he wanted it or not, he indeed became the father of television, and not just American television. And it's not just because I'm exaggerating. No, I'm not. There is a museum of Sarnoff Corporation. I've never been there, I've never been to the States, as you know, but there are a lot of photographs. And once things started to look up for the television in the States, the Soviet Union got extremely interested in this technology, and Zworykin was invited to the States by the Soviet government. Who would have thought, right? But I guess the Soviet Union saw a great potential in television as the best propaganda tool, and when they were so right. They were they were really, really, really right. Um, but obviously that entailed a lot of risks for Zworykin, because of his descent, the son of a merchant of the first guild, which is so like very rich merchant of high level, top rank. And also he was the officer of the Imperial White Army, or the Imperial Army, and then and he was with the White Army. That didn't look good, and that sounded surreal, absolutely surreal. But eventually, since it was all done on the official level, Zworykin decided to go, and he came to Leningrad. Um, St. Petersburg is the name before the First World War. Then, after the First World War, the city was renamed. When the First World War started, it was renamed into Petrograd. And then in the 1920s, after Lenin passed away in 1924, it was named after Lenin, because Lenin is the one who ignited the revolution or finalized the revolution, and it happened in Petrograd. So that's why it's Leningrad. And he was given a very warm welcome. He would be taken everywhere he wanted to go. And the first place Zworykin wanted to go would be his institute. This is the photo taken in Leningrad, in one of the buildings of this technical institute that he graduated about 20 years ago. And this is when he found out that Boris Rosing, his teacher and the head of the laboratory, I spoke about him 10 minutes ago. He had been, first imprisoned and then executed because he was of a noble descent, and because he was the supporter of the White Army. And then, as you know, the Soviets didn't really need many reasons. They didn't really need any excuse to get rid of you. So who cared? So Boris Rosing was gone. And also, I would like to remind you that both parents of Zworykin perished in the revolution. So his father died because because he had lost everything, because everything, all the property was nationalized and merchants and aristocrats lost everything overnight. And then his mother also died several months after their gigantic house, the biggest building in the entire city of Muram, was turned into a communal apartment. So this is when his mother also passed away. But there were also other family members still around, such as his brother. We don't know much about his brother. We know that his name was Nikolai Zworykin, and Nikolai Zworykin was an engineer as well. So I guess it was all the family of engineers in a way, physicists, engineers, and business-oriented minds. And Nikolai, believe it or not, even before the revolution, was involved in a big project, developing water supply system where? In Tbilisi. You see, all my tours get connected. It's not really how I plan it, but it just happens so. It was a big project to bring and to improve the water system, to supply not just Tbilisi, but the big territory of the Caucasus region. And he started before, and then his brother was convicted for, again, some imaginary crime, but he continued working on the same construction project, but already as a convict. So imagine, you see, that was efficient. He had already been in the Caucasus, so there was no need to exile him anywhere further, and he kept on working on the project, but then he wouldn't be paid for it. So that's how they also saved money. You may have watched Misha's tours on the Soviets' history, and Misha gave a very detailed talk about the labor camps, which was the great solution to the big, development issue. Not enough money to pay for the workforce. Enslave people, make them prisoners of your labor camp. You see? So I would say that's the case in point. Exactly. So, and his brother was still around. So Beria, whom you may remember from my multiple tours of Tbilisi, who was a Georgian himself, just like Stalin, and he was the loyal assistant to Stalin. So Beria gladly provided an airplane, so a plane that took Zworykin to Tbilisi, and Zworykin managed to see his brother in Tbilisi. We're talking 1930s. And after that, it was like a private plane, that was definitely part of, I would say, the KGB aircraft, something. And after that, from Tbilisi, they went to Sukhum or Sukhumi, which is the territory of Abkhazia. And Abkhazia is a sensitive topic because it's occupied by Russia. And Georgia consider it, well, Georgians obviously believe that Abkhazia is their territory. It's a complex issue within the Abkhazia itself, I would say within the region, because they didn't want to become part of Georgia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, Sharon, but if it's okay now, I'll carry on. So thank you for updating me. Yeah, but nevertheless, they went to Sukhumi, they went to the beach, they had some beach time in Abkhazia. At that time, it was part of the Soviet Union, so it was okay. Sukhumi was a popular resort area. Well, and all that, Sukhum or Sukhumi, Sukhum, you see it. And after that, he returned to Moscow, which is an incredible story. And the trip very well. So it was the beginning of a a strategic, uh, well, not really a partnership, but the Soviet Union purchased the technology, the television technology, and they purchased the license, and there were several people that were assigned within RCA and were sent to the Soviet Union to oversee the fulfillment of the project and just the works and manage everything. So it was a multi-million project. It was worth millions, and the Soviet Union was ready to invest all the money because they knew they were after something very big and very important. And this is when Zworykin was offered a position. He was actually given a job offer to become the chief curator of the television project in the Soviet Union, in the entire Soviet Union. And he was promised, he was assured gazillion of times that neither his background nor his story of immigration, White Army, and everything, none of this would matter. And he took that, he didn't take the offer, but it took him a while. He was contemplating taking the offer or not taking the offer, but he still had to go to Moscow because he had to be there for the initial stages of the implementation. And eventually, in 1937, the television was launched in the Soviet Union, and the first film that was aired was The Great Citizen. And by the way, the director was a Jew. So as I told you on my Jewish heritage tours, that during the Soviet time, a lot of Jews made incredible careers. And Friedrich Ermler was one of those talented film directors that became one of the favorite film directors of Stalin, of the Soviet Union, and just an amazing career growth. So that's the case in point. And that film, obviously, Zworykin knew about it. So it wasn't really like said directly, but the whole movie was the head of the Communist Party in Leningrad, and whose museum we visited several months ago in St. Petersburg. And he was murdered. And we know that his murder ignited the so-called Red Terror campaign. And well, it's the first Red Terror campaign was launched with Lenin, but it was kind of the second terror campaign, called also the Purge. So 1937, 1934, he was killed. 1937, finally, the big stage of the Purge started, and that film was really, really timely. So for Zworykin, it was the signal not to take the offer. However, it was really, really tempting. Uh, really tempting. So, as I said, Zworykin had to come again to oversee the implementation stages and everything. And he came to Leningrad. And while in Leningrad, he was staying with his sister. By the way, the video that I'm showing you, we're going to be there in, let me see, in 20 minutes from now. So a little bit to the left is exactly the English embankment. Yeah, just saying, but it looked a little different now. And definitely not black and white. Yes. So when he was in Leningrad, he was staying with his sister, who was wife of Dmitry Nalivkin. Dmitry Nalivkin was a great scholar. He was a geologist, and he was it's like PhD and the member of the Academy of Science, which was like you couldn't go higher than that. So he was the biggest authority in the Soviet geology or Russian geology. Uh, and Zworykin shared in his memoirs, and I read that part. Um, I, I haven't read the entire book, but of that I gave a lot of attention to. They got along very well. So, and this is the photo taken in a much later period, like 1960s. But there was a talk in the kitchen between Nalivkin, Zworykin's sister, and Zworykin himself. And Zworykin basically was picking his brain. Okay, let's not go too far, not just now. And Nalivkin was really against that idea because, so his position was, while Zworykin held an American passport, he was safe. But once they took his American passport from him, they could do anything. And there was an example that kind of was I would say, the decisive factor. You may have heard of another Russian scientist, Pyotr Kapitsa. Uh, Pyotr Kapitsa, well, just for those who are not exactly familiar, so who was he? I kind of providing a small like text from the Wikipedia, basically for you to kind of have an idea of what kind of big scale scientist Pyotr Kapitsa was. He was a physicist and an engineer. He was a pioneer in low temperature physics, and he's also responsible for the discovery of superfluidity in liquid helium, which is a big deal. He worked with Ernest Rutherford, who was one of the founding father of atomic program in Cambridge, in the Cavendish laboratory. And actually, Kapitsa taught and did an extensive research in Cambridge. And then in 1934, he had a brief trip to Russia, and then he was not let to go back. He was not allowed to go back to Britain. Instead, the Soviet government built and established a research institute of physical problems for Kapitsa. He became the head of this research institute and remained in the Soviet Union and survived through hell. Let me know later on if you'd be interested in a talk about Kapitsa. It's an amazing story. And do I have to say that later on Kapitsa won a Nobel Prize? I guess it was expected, right? So no surprises here, right? And while Zworykin was in Leningrad, he met Kapitsa, and he asked him. It was 1934, so like it was 1934 that he was not allowed to go back. So when Zworykin visited Moscow and Leningrad, so he asked him when eventually Kapitsa will be back to Cambridge uh, because for Zworykin, London was normally the stopover in his journeys between America and the Soviet Union. And Kapitsa didn't say anything, and only later on, when upon Zworykin's return to the States, he found out what the issue was, and that was it. So this is when he realized that's Kapitsa in Cambridge, by the way. Yep. And well, that was it. He declined the offer politely, but he would be visiting Soviet Union many times. So the Soviet Union purchased the technology, but it wasn't the only country, by the way, that purchased these technologies from the States. Um, there was one more thing that happened. In one of the visits, Zworykin kind of wanted to check how safe he was, because every time going to the Soviet Union, he felt he was at a huge risk. And one day, so you may remember from Tanya or Anya's tours in Moscow, not far from the Bolshoi Theater, there is a beautiful hotel called Metropole. This is the colorized 19th century postcard, and this is the photo taken in the Soviet times. So in Metropole, it's Metropole, which is clearly the um, a symbol of the past of the imperial glory, so to speak, but the Soviets used that to house delegations and, well, for other political reasons and so on and so forth. Plus, KGB headquarters was basically around the corner. So you can imagine that every room there was wired, was bugged. And we know actually who was the mastermind behind all these bugs and you who it was. You remember the story of Leon Servin, the absolutely amazing story. And well, just some photos of the interiors of Metropole. And then just before it was one of the visits in 1930s, and just before the departure next day, they threw a kind of a party, a dinner for Zworykin as a VIP guest and everything. And at the dinner, Zworykin at the dinner, there were present a lot of officials, and the head of the party was Alexei Rykov, who was the Minister of Communications. Just to see, I'm simplifying a little bit, but we can say that he was responsible for the public relations of the Communist Party, something like that. Uh, and he asked Zworykin to give a speech. Zworykin gave a speech. But as I said, he wanted to see if he could get away with a very provocative remark. He remembered, so by the way, that's Rykov. You see, he was always there, giving speeches. And Zworykin remembered Boris Rosing. He just said, "Rest in peace, Boris Rosing, my mentor." And he made everyone say, "Rest in peace." There was a dead silence for a moment. And then everyone said, "Rest in peace." So they remembered Boris Rosing, which was a death sentence. Needless to say that Rykov, well, among many other things, that was also one of the reasons, as if he was a supporter of the public enemy Boris Rosing. Next year, he would be done with. So obviously, there were also other things, and we know how extremely um, unstable the position of many people could have been. One day, you are the most loyal and highly respected assistant to Joseph Stalin, and then the next day you already find yourself in a labor camp somewhere in Chukotka, Russian Far East or Far North. Well, Rykov was executed like next year, but with regards to Zworykin, things were okay. He was let go, and he got away with it. It wasn't his plan to jeopardize Rykov. His plan was to find out whether it was okay to carry on coming to the Soviet Union. But he returned to the States, and as I said, it wasn't just the Soviet Union who purchased the technology, it was also France. England was different. In England, they had developed their own system, but it had a lot less capacity, but it was somewhat similar. So I remember, Sharon, you mentioned that you watched, not you, I mean, but some of your mother, I guess, watched TV with some cable or something. So they still used the cable for it in the 1930s in London, well, in England, I assume, in Great Britain, but we're talking about the electronic television, right? So there was no wire. It was not that. So um, and and finally, the time came to launch the broadcast on a mass scale in New York. And this is when Radio Corporation of America installed an antenna on the top of the Empire State Building. I'm not sure if it's still there. I guess not. But this is from the same video I shared with you last time. So this is the same video. So they just given you a story of how television actually came through this transmission on the Empire State Building. It came to every household in New York, and it was very simple because New York is flat. And if it is flat, there is no interference, there's no blockade or anything, nothing is blocking the signal. So it was easy, and it showed great success because this is when television reached every household and every woman who was the main power, when it got to buying things, right? So the Radio Corporation knew very well with the successful example. Risha, could you please turn down the volume? Um, and they did the same with radio some 30 years before, and then they were doing the same, many, many millions of dollars investment later. They were doing the same in with television in New York. So that was the first step, so to speak. And yes, at that point, it was still live broadcasting, but it was done on a mass scale. Do I have to say that the Third Reich also wanted to purchase this technology? And Zworykin mentioned that he had been invited multiple times by someone from Germany to come and also supervise. They wanted to purchase the technology, which would cost them millions, and the Third Reich was happy to do that. But Zworykin declined, and Radio Corporation of America did not do that. So it must have been Goebbels. It must have been Goebbels. Okay, so I guess this is where we put it on hold because in 5 minutes from now, we are to catch up by the English embankment in St. Petersburg. So the next episode for the Zworykin tour is already up. I'm going to share the links once again. So let me know on the chat, and the chat is open now. If you'd be interested to in a talk about Sarnov, in a talk about Kapitsa. Those are incredible stories, less known. So I'm happy to share it with you, but I don't know if it's something you would be interested in. It's kind of a niche thing. So, but I'm sharing here the links. Especially for those who joined us a little after we started, I am not sure whether you can see the previous messages. So I'm sharing them gladly again. I would like to remind you that the second tour will be in 5 minutes from now, and it's going to be the English embankment. Sharon, so it was your mother who watched the BBC on the first TV, via the cable. So that's exactly it. Goebbels was a TV repairman beside the Nazi. I I guess so. But I'm pretty sure it was Goebbels who called and was very, I would say, persistent in getting to talk with Zworykin and the Radio Corporation of America. I'm sure he wanted to reach out Sarnoff as well, but they did not partner with the Nazis. So that we know for sure. We know a lot of businesses that did, but that was not the case. I don't know either, but I'm interested in whatever you tell us. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dolly. Why image of the Empire State Building had I have no idea why it was green. This is the photo from Wikipedia. You tell me. You live in the States. I have no idea why it was green. So no idea. What I know, and I didn't know that before, I only learned it from that video on YouTube that they use Empire State Building as a big antenna from where they would transmit the signal. So that's what I know. 1939, so that's approximately the same time. As I said, so all these processes, like uh, many such processes and developments, they would happen at, I would say, in parallel, one at the same time. It's a common story. Yeah. The same happened with radio. The same happened with many other technologies that were discovered in the 20th century. Okay, so this is it. Probably it was exactly his area, Goebbels. Well, yeah, of course. He was dealing with public relations and the image of the Third Reich. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is it. We are to see each other in around 4 minutes in St. Petersburg in the English embankment. Thank you, everyone, in your interest in this tour, in this talk. The Empire used for signal also with. Robert, I'm so sorry. I don't understand what you're talking about. Nazis had nothing to do with the Empire State Building, unless you know something we don't know. Nevertheless, so we know that RCA is not involved with the Nazis, was not involved whatsoever. I will see you soon. Thank you so much for your interest. Thank you for your questions and thank you for your support. You have all the links. You have the links to my YouTube channel, Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, and my website, where a lot more tours are already up. The News Zworykin tour is to take place on the 15th of November, which is Saturday, because as you know, Sunday we have a special guest in Tbilisi, and we will be exploring Tbilisi on a live stream mode together with this very special guest, who I am not going to talk about now, not laying all cards on the table. Okay, I still don't understand what it has to do with Zworykin and Nazis. Okay, uh, please just text me, message me on Facebook, and I need to know what I want to know what you're talking about. But as of now, I'm just so confused, and I need to head to St. Petersburg. I will see you soon. Bye bye.